Now let's look at some approaches to better understand whether or not an individual is conscious. In particular, an individual who might be in a vegetative state or some other minimally conscious state versus, for example, someone who is fully conscious but unable to communicate or move in any way, something called locked-in syndrome. Responses to a simple stimulus like a beep can help distinguish between being conscious and not. Consciousness is associated with activity, again, remember it spreads beyond the original processing area. So in this case, a beep is an auditory stimulus, so it's going to go to the thalamus, the medial geniculate nucleus, and from there it'll spread to the auditory processing area, the auditory cortex, and so on. But then it's going to spread beyond that, and that's the idea of it being something that enters our conscious awareness. And so here we're seeing the spread of activation throughout large parts of the brain in response to a beep in a conscious control individual. So this is 110 participants, and just the typical brain reaction to a beep. An individual in a vegetative state, as you can see, is not producing anywhere near that level of activity. However, an individual experiencing locked-in syndrome does seem to be fully conscious in the sense that they're experiencing the same type of brain activity, or nearly the same type of brain activity as a regular individual who is fully conscious. And we can see here on the bottom right the level of brain activity in a person that's considered minimally conscious. So we can see that the amount of brain activation and the spreading of that activation is a good measure of how conscious a person might be. In addition, one way has been developed to try and communicate with vegetative patients, and it is to ask them just to think of either walking through a forest or playing tennis. Now, these two mental images create distinct patterns of brain activity, and the individual then just thinks of one or the other, either a game of tennis or walking through the forest, to respond to simple yes or no questions. And so walking through the forest might be a yes, but playing tennis might be a no. And this allows for basic communication to occur. After doing this, it was learned that 5 of 6 of patients, these patients that were considered vegetative, were not actually in a vegetative state at all. They were just not able to communicate in typical ways with others, but they were able to process information, and they did seem to be conscious of what was going on around them. In addition, activity in the hippocampus seems to be associated with a very intriguing phenomenon, that of a personality change in dissociative identity disorder. So here we're looking at scans showing inhibition of the parahippocampus and the hippocampus. So basically a nearby area to the hippocampus called the parahippocampus, as well as the hippocampus, become inactive when the switch happens from the primary personality to the alter personality. And then when it switches back to the primary, there's actually an increased activity in the right hippocampus during that return to the primary personality. So the hippocampus, interestingly enough, is associated in sort of that passage from the primary to the alter, and then increased activity as the personality returns to the primary one.